Under fire, the sky was burning orange and black as if the world itself was screaming. Jake ran through the ash and fire, his boots sliding on the broken metal floor of the abandoned outpost. Arrows of glowing crystal flew past him, lighting up the smoke with deadly sparks. His breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling like a machine about to break. He heard it again, a soft cry, not human. It came from the far end of the corridor behind a wall that was half fallen. He pushed forward, ignoring the pain in his leg where shrapnel had torn through his skin. He did not care anymore. He just followed the sound. Then he saw Hirsch. She was small, maybe 10 or 11, with glowing pale skin and wide silver eyes, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She was shaking in fear, cornered by a wall and crates. Her head turned fast and her eyes locked on his. A moment they both stared at each other. Jake could see it in her face. She was expecting pain. She was ready to be hurt like so many others her kind had been, and then it happened. From above, a dark shadow moved. A Vorak archer, tall and monstrous, raised his bow and aimed right at the girl. Jake didn't think. He threw himself forward, arms wide, screaming no as loud as he could. The arrow was already flying through the air, glowing like fire. It hit not her jiu, and it tore through his shoulder and slammed him against the crates, but he stayed up. He kept himself between her and the next shot. The girl gasped. She reached out with her hand, her voice soft like wind through glass. Jake dropped to one knee, pain exploding in his head. But he didn't fall, not yet. He reached for his cum and shouted for backup, his voice weak but clear. The Vorak vanished into the smoke. More would come. He knew that, but right now he had to protect her. She slowly stepped closer, her eyes full of tears. But not fear anymore, something else, something he had not seen in a long time. Trust. She reached out her hand again, this time to touch his wound, her fingers glowing faintly, and when she touched him he felt something strange, not pain, not fear, but warmth. Then darkness took him. When Jake opened his eyes, everything was silent. He was lying on soft moss, not hard metal. Above him was a dome glowing with gentle green light. He tried to sit up, but his arm screamed in pain, and he dropped back down. He turned his head and saw her sitting beside him, quiet, watching him carefully. She did not speak with words, but he understood somehow. You saved me. Jake blinked, confused how he could understand without hearing. Then another voice came, sharp and angry. A tall woman stepped into view, her face tight with suspicion. She looked at him like he was poison. This is the human Lyra. You brought him here. Lyra, that was her name. The girl. Jake tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. I just wanted to help. The woman, Mira, frowned and turned away. Humans only help themselves. Lyra reached into her robe and pulled out something glowing like a crystal with a soft heartbeat. It pulsed in her hand. She looked at Jake, then placed the crystal on his chest right above his wound. Jake flinched as it sank into his skin, not cutting, not hurting, just becoming part of him. His eyes widened. Suddenly he could feel something inside him change. Could feel her sadness, her hope, her fear, and something stronger, a connection. Lyra looked at him and smiled just a little. Now you understand. Jake lay back, staring at the dome ceiling. He had come to this planet to fight, but he had just stepped into something deeper than war, something that would change everything. And outside the dome, shadows moved again. The Vorak had not given up. They had only just begun. The girl and the gift. Jake sat up slowly. The green light above him gave off a calm feeling, but inside his head there was a storm. He could still feel the weight of the crystal in his chest, not heavy, but alive, like it was breathing with him. Lyra sat a few feet away, watching him, her hands folded on her lap, her silver eyes full of quiet thoughts. Jake tried to speak, but stopped. He could feel her thoughts, not in words, but like whispers of wind pushing softly at the edge of his mind. Her fear, her relief, her curiosity, all of it touched him and made him feel less like a soldier and more like a person again. He looked around. The dome was large and round, made of stone and glowing vines. Small pools of light floated above like stars in a night sky, peaceful but guarded. The woman called Mira walked in again, her long cloak brushing the floor, her eyes cold and sharp. She did not trust him, not even a little. You are awake, she said, though her tone had no warmth. Jake nodded slowly, his voice dry. Where am I? Lyra spoke before Mira could answer, her voice soft but firm. You are safe for now. This place is hidden. The Vorak cannot reach it yet. Jake looked at her, then at the faint scar on his shoulder where the arrow had hit him. It was already healing faster than it should have. That thing you gave me, he said. What is it? Lyra touched her chest lightly, then pointed at him. It is a bond, not forced, but chosen. It means you are connected to me. You can feel my emotions, and I can feel yours only if we let it happen. Jake tried to understand. It was strange, but not scary. It felt honest and alive. Myra stepped forward, her voice sharper now. You should leave, human. This place is not for your kind. Jake stood slowly, the pain still there, but fading. I did not ask to come here. I just tried to protect her. I had no idea she was important. Lyra looked up at Mira, her voice calm. He saved me. He took the arrow without thinking. That means something to me, even if you do not believe it. Mira turned away, clearly not happy. The bond cannot be undone now, but do not expect welcome later. That day, Jake sat outside near a small pool of glowing water. Birds with wings like glass flew past. The sky was a soft purple, the air cool and clean. Lyra sat beside him, her legs crossed, her face thoughtful. Your world is different, she said, full of noise and fire. Jake smiled faintly. And this one is full of silence and danger. She looked at him, her eyes steady. Why did you save me? Jake paused. He had asked himself the same thing. I think because I saw someone helpless, and I could not walk away. I have done enough of that in my life. She nodded slowly. You lost someone? He looked at her, surprised. Yeah, I did. My brother, he was in my unit. He did not make it out. I did. I still don't know why. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was pain in them. We lost many too. The Vorak take more than lives, they take light from the soul. Jake stared at the pool, then at his reflection. What are the Vorak really? Why do they hunt your people? Lyra stood and walked to a small tree, her fingers brushing the leaves. They feed on life, not just bodies but spirit. They fear what they cannot control, and we are not built to fight, only to feel. Jake stood too, his body stronger, now the bond inside him like a steady flame. Then you need people who can fight and feel. That night, Jake slept inside the dome, but his dreams were not his own. He saw flashes of Lyra's memories, a village burning, voices crying, her small hands clutching her mother's robe. Before being pulled away, he woke in sweat, heart pounding. The bond had shown him more than he expected. In the morning, Mira called him to the edge of the dome where a view of the forest stretched below. We found signs, she said. The Vorak scouts are near again. They know someone was rescued. They will come back. Jake looked at the trees beyond the fog. Then let me help defend this place. Myra looked at him with the smallest flicker of respect. You would stay and fight for people who do not want you here. Jake looked at Lyra, who had walked up beside them, her eyes full of quiet strength. I would fight for her, and for whatever this is, he said, pointing to his chest where the crystal bond still pulsed. Myra gave a short nod, then turned to leave. We begin training. Now do not slow us down. Lyra smiled for the first time, truly smiled. You are not like the others. Jakey smiled back. Neither are you, Lyra. But deep in the forest, the Vorak moved again, their leader holding a strange dark device that pulsed with red light. They were tracking the bond. They were coming between two worlds. The morning came with silence, but not peace. The sky above the forest was gray with thick clouds, and the light inside the dome flickered gently like it could sense danger. Jake stood with his legs firm and arms raised, trying to copy the movements of the elder who trained him. The elder moved slowly, each motion sharp and quiet like wind cutting through grass. Jake was not graceful, but he was strong and determined. Behind him, Lyra watched with interest. She sat on a stone ledge, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes tracking every motion with a calm focus. Elder stepped back and spoke without looking. You are improving, but your mind is still too loud. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and tried again. He focused on his breathing, on the feel of the ground under his feet, on the strange hum of the bond inside his chest. Lyra stood and walked toward him, her voice soft but firm. You are fighting with your past, not with your present. Jake lowered his arms and turned toward her. What do you mean? She looked at him, her silver eyes steady. You carry guilt like armor. It is heavy and useless now. Jake looked away. He thought of his brother, of the faces, of those he had failed, of the screams that still echoed in his mind at night. Maybe I needed to remember. Lyra touched his chest lightly where the crystal pulsed. Then remember without letting it chain you. Later that day, they sat by the edge of the dome looking out at the trees. The forest seemed peaceful, but Jake knew that peace was not real. Tell me about your people, he said. Lyra took a deep breath, her fingers tracing patterns on the stone beside her. We were once a people of art and peace. We built cities that floated and gardens that sang with light. We felt each other without words and shared joy like fire in winter. But the Vorak came and they feared what they did not understand. They took our cities, burned our gardens, and broke our hearts. Jake listened quietly, his jaw tight. Why does no one fight back? She looked at him with sadness. We are not made for war, we are made for life. Then let me be the one who fights for you. Lyra smiled faintly. That is why the bond chose you. In the evening, Jake walked alone through the outer chambers of the sanctuary. Carved into the rock walls were stories painted in glowing dust, showing battles, losses, memories of a time before destruction. He stopped at one that showed a single figure standing between a monster and a child. He stared at it for a long time. That night a message came through his communicator, crackling with static. It was Captain Ross, the voice clear but cold. Jake's status report. We are prepping evacuation orders. Reach the cliff Mason 12 hours, and do not bring any hostiles or non-human life. Jake stared at the communicator in his hand, the voice still echoing in his mind. Do not bring any hostiles or non-human life. He turned off the device and stood in the silence of the chamber. Later, as he walked back to the main hall, he saw Lyra standing near the tree of memory, her hand pressed to the bark, her face unreadable. He walked up behind her slowly. I got a message from my people. They want me to leave and leave you all behind. Lyra nodded once as if she already knew. Will you go? Jake hesitated. I do not know. You have a place with them, she said, and none here trust you. I do not need them to trust me. Then why are you afraid? Jake looked at her, heart racing. Because if I leave now, I will lose something I never thought I would find again. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes full of quiet fire. And if you stay, you may lose your life. Jake stepped closer. Then I will stay. That night, as the dome grew quiet, Lyra stood alone near the outer edge, staring into the shadows. She touched her chest where her own crystal pulsed, then slowly turned and walked away from the sanctuary. At dawn, Mira came rushing into the hall, her voice sharp. She is gone. Jake jumped to his feet. What do you mean gone? She left during the night. No one saw her go. Jake felt a cold fear rise inside him. His chest burned where the bond had once felt warm. He ran to the edge of the dome, searching the horizon. The wind was thick with mist, but he could feel it. She was out there. He turned to Mira. Where would she go? Mira's face was pale. There's only one place she would go. If she thought it would save us. Jake's hands curled into fists. She went to them. Mira nodded slowly. She is surrendering herself to the Vorak. Jake took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the dark edge of the forest. Then I am going after her. Mira grabbed his arm. It is a trap. They want her for her power. They want you for the bond. Jake pulled away. Then they will get more than they bargained for. He stepped out into the mist, not looking back, and as the shadows of the trees swallowed him, the bond pulsed faintly like a heartbeat in the dark. The last arrow. The forest was silent as Jake moved through the thick mist, each step heavy with fear and fire. He held his breath, listening for any sound, any sign that he was close to her. His boots pressed into the wet ground, and the trees above seemed to whisper warnings. He could feel the bond again, pulsing faintly like a soft light in the dark, not strong but enough to guide him. It pulled him forward, not with force, but with something deeper, something inside his soul. His mind was full of thoughts. What if he was too late? What if the Vorak had already taken her? What if this was the end of the bond? He pushed through a wall of vines and stopped at the top of a cliff. Below was a wide clearing, surrounded by dead trees and black stone, and in the middle stood Lyra, her hands bound by glowing chains, her head bowed around her. The Vorak stood tall and still like statues, their skin like cracked stone, their eyes red and cold. One of them held a long staff with a sharp edge glowing with cruel light. Jake did not wait. He slid down the cliff and ran into the clearing, drawing the small blade Mira had given him. He shouted her name and the Vorak turned fast. Lyra looked up, her eyes wide with shock. No. Jake, go back. He shook his head. Not this time. The Vorak leader stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his armor black and his voice like thunder. You were warned, human. This is not your fight. Jake raised his blade. It is now. The leader lifted his staff, and a blast of red light flew toward Jake. He rolled under it and ran closer, slicing through the legs of one Vorak before spinning to block another. They came at him from all sides, but Jake moved like fire. He was not the strongest, not the fastest, but he was desperate and filled with something they would never understand, love. He felt the bond grow hotter with each strike. He landed. He could feel Lyra's fear, her hope, her pain, and her scream when one of the arrows flew toward her. With thinking, he threw himself forward again. One more time he jumped between her and the arrow, letting it hit his side hard. He fell to the ground, gasping, his body shaking, but he did not let go of the blade. Lyra's chains cracked from the energy of the bond, and in that moment, something changed. She fell beside him, her hands on his chest, the crystal inside them, both glowing bright. No more, she whispered. No more pain, no more fear. The light exploded from her chest into his, and from his into the earth. The whole clearing filled with blue fire. The Vorak screamed, covering their eyes, their skin burning from the bond's power. Jake felt himself lift from the ground, not with his body, but with his mind. He could see everything around him, the trees, the sky, the fear in the enemies' hearts. He reached out with his thoughts and pushed. The Vorak were thrown back like leaves in wind. The chains shattered, the dark staff cracked, and the leader fell to one knee. Lyra stood now, her face calm, her hands glowing like stars. Will not touch us again. The leader tried to rise, but Jake stepped in front of Lyra again, his body weak but his heart strong. Go now, or fall forever. The Vorak turned and vanished into the forest, their cries fading like smoke. Silence returned to the clearing. Jake dropped to his knees, and Lyra caught him, holding him close, her tears falling onto his face. You came for me, he smiled weakly. I told you I would. She touched his face, and the bond pulsed one last time, strong and warm. You gave everything, so did you. He closed his eyes, not in pain, but in peace. When Jake woke again, he was back in the sanctuary, his body wrapped in soft cloth, his wounds healing fast. Lyra sat beside him, her head resting on his chest. He looked at her and whispered, "Is it over?" She nodded slowly, for now Mira entered the room, her face no longer cold. You saved us all. Jake sat up, his body tired but steady. I did not do it alone. Later Mira called him to the outer edge of the dome where a human ship had landed. Captain Ross stood outside, arms crossed, eyes scanning the area. Jake walked up to him slowly. You came. Ross nodded once. You broke protocol. Ignored orders, risked everything. Jake stared at him, waiting. Ross gave a faint smile. And I think you found something worth more than any mission. Jake looked back at Lyra, who stood near the tree of memory, her eyes full of light. Yeah, I did. Ross placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. The report will say you went missing. I suggest you stay that way. Jake nodded. Thank you. As the ship rose back into the sky, Jake stood with Lyra, watching the clouds shift. She reached into her robe and pulled out a small glowing crystal. Take this with you, she said. When you feel lost, hold it, and you will find me again. Jake held it in his hand and smiled. I already found you. The reward wasn't gold. Jake sat on the edge of the dome, looking out at the horizon where the sun was just beginning to rise. The world was quiet again, too. Quiet after everything that had happened. His body still ached, but his mind was clear for the first time in years. Beside him, Lyra stood looking out at the same view, her hair blowing gently in the wind. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They both understood the silence between them was not empty, but full of meaning. Jake looked down at the glowing crystal she had given him. It felt warm in his hand, as if it was alive, like the bond between them. Lyra finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. You are leaving. Jake nodded slowly, the weight of the decision heavy in his chest. I have to go back to Earth. They need me there. She turned to face him, her silver eyes searching his face. But what about us? Jake smiled faintly. What about us? She stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm. You saved me. You saved all of us. I cannot go with you, but I will always be with you, even from afar. He looked at the crystal again and felt the bond flicker inside him like a pulse. It was strong and unbreakable. Now I don't know how to live without this, he said softly. Lyra smiled gently. You will learn just like I did. They stood in silence for a moment before Jake stood up and turned toward the door to the outside world. I won't forget you, Lyra. She nodded, and for the first time since they met there was no sadness in her eyes, only strength. I know you won't. Jake walked out into the morning light, the sun warm on his face and the breeze fresh against his skin. As he approached the human ship waiting for him, he saw Captain Ross standing beside it. His arms crossed. Jake hesitated, but then Ross spoke, his voice calm but with a hint of respect. You did what you had to do, Jake. No one can take that away from you. Jake looked at him for a long moment and then nodded. I did it because I had to, not because I wanted to. Ross glanced toward the horizon where the sun was rising higher. I know what you mean. Jake stepped onto the ship and turned back for one last look at the sanctuary. Lyra was still standing there watching him, her face calm, but her eyes full of something he couldn't explain. The ship took off slowly, rising above the trees, the clearing fading behind him as the world stretched out before him. For the first time in his life, Jake felt a sense of peace. He didn't know where he was going or what he would find there, but he knew he wasn't alone. Inside him, the crystal pulsed softly, a quiet reminder of what he had gained, not from fighting, but from trusting and caring. And as the ship soared through the clouds, he closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he felt free. The journey wasn't over, but the weight of his past was no longer a chain. He had been saved, not by weapons or glory, but by the one thing that had always been missing in his life: connection. Bond was no longer a curse, it was a gift, and it would change everything. The end.